Welcome to the September 27th online gathering of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Little Rock. Whether you're joining us on Sunday morning or finding us sometime throughout the week, we are so glad that you have made the decision to be a part of our service. I'm Rebecca Retzel, a proud member of UUCLR. About 1 year ago, I agreed to be the chair of the worship arts team. Little did I know everything that this year would have in store. It has been a ride, yes, but a joy to serve the congregation in this capacity. And in hindsight, this tethering commitment to UUCLR has actually fortified one of the most deeply sunken anchors in my life. It has been pulled tightly at times, yes, but it is one of the few that has not budged in spite of the twirling and swirling chaos in the waters of the world today. With each emotional upheaval in my life, I realize that these metaphorical layers of debris actually bury that anchor even deeper. It has made me feel stronger and more connected, even in times of isolation and change and uncertainty. As we proceed with these online worship services and gatherings, I want to encourage you to think for a moment, how is your anchor to this church being fortified? If you want information about our church and local happenings, please get in touch with our office. You can email uuclr@uuclr.org. And if you would like to be a participant in these weekly services, making a commitment to participate, maybe as a regular reader or a greeter, or you're willing to help with some of the video editing, please reach out to me or to the office. Again, uuclr@uuclr.org. If you, like me, might be surprised and humbled by the return on your investment. I invite you now to enter into a spirit of worship as we begin today's service. Our opening words for today, a poem entitled Rosh Hashanah by Lucille Clifton. I bear witness to nothing more human than hate. I bear witness to no thing more human than love. Apples and honey, apples and honey. What is not lost is paradise.
As we say every Sunday, our words for our affirmation of covenant. Love is the doctrine of this church. Our quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer, to dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other. Hi, my name is Sarah Goldberg, and I'm lighting the chalice today. And today we light the chalice with words from Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Fight the things you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you.
We pause now to recognize the milestones and meditations of our congregation. We send our loving wishes to Selma Blackburn, who is home from the hospital. Selma says she wants everyone to know that she gratefully accepts the good energy and positive messages our congregation freely shares. She is honored by the goodness of our congregation, both as individuals and as a group. Selma sends her profound thanks and love and says to all, Namaste. Our hearts celebrate with those who are celebrating milestones today, and we breathe deeply with those who are struggling with health concerns, personal relationships, financial strain, loss of a loved one, stress, anxiety, uncertainty. We hold you in our hearts now with wishes of peace, courage, hope, and love.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stories of compassion. Blowing the wind, rise in the sea, moving the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots folding close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Good morning again. This is Sarah again. Today's reading will be by Julie Gabriella. It's called Sky Woman Falling. In the beginning, there was Sky World. She fell like a maple seed pirouetting in the autumn breeze. A column of light streamed from a hole in the sky world, marking her path where only darkness had been before. It took her a long time to fall. In fear, or maybe hope, she clutched a bundle tightly in her hand. Hurtling downward, she saw only dark water below, but in that emptiness were many eyes gazing up at the sudden shaft of light. They saw there a small object, a mere dust mote in the beam. As it grew closer, they could see it was a woman, arms outstretched, long black hair billowing behind as she spiraled toward them. The geese nodded at one another and rose together from the water in a wave of goose music. She felt the beat of their wings as they flew beneath to break her fall. Far from the only home she had ever known, she caught her breath at the warm embrace of soft feathers as they gently carried her downward. And so it began. The geese could not hold the woman above the water for much longer, so they called a council to decide what to do. Resting on their wings, she saw them all gather, loons, otters, swans, beavers, fish of all kinds. A great turtle floated in their midst and offered his back for her to rest upon. Gratefully she stepped from the goose wings onto the dome of the shell. The others understood that she needed land for her home and discussed how they might serve her need. The deep divers among them had heard of mud at the bottom of the water and agreed to go find some. Loon dove first, but the distance was too far, and after a long while he surfaced with nothing to show for his efforts. One by one, the other animals offered to help: otter, beaver, sturgeon, but the depths, the darkness, and the pressures were too great for even the strongest swimmers. They returned gasping for air, with their heads ringing. Some did not return at all. Soon only little Muskrat was left, the weakest diver of all. He volunteered to go while the others looked on doubtfully. His small legs flailed as he worked his way downward, and he was gone a very long time. They waited and waited for him to return, fearing the worst for their relative, and before long a stream of bubbles rose with the small, limp body of the muskrat. He had given his life to aid this helpless human. But then the others noticed that his paw was tightly clenched, and when they opened it, there was a small handful of mud. Turtle said, "Here, put it on my back and I will hold it." Sky Woman bent and spread the mud with her hands across the shell of the turtle. Moved by the extraordinary gifts of the animals, she sang in thanksgiving and then began to dance, her feet caressing the earth. The land grew and grew as she danced her thanks from the dab of mud on Turtle's back until the whole earth was made, not by Sky Woman alone, but from the alchemy of all the animals' gifts, coupled with her deep gratitude. Together they formed what we know today as Turtle Island, our home. Like any good guest, Sky Woman had not come empty-handed. The bundle was still clutched in her hand. When she toppled from the hole in the sky world, she had reached out to grab onto the tree of life that grew there. In her grasp were branches, fruits and seeds of all kinds of plants. These she scattered onto the new ground and carefully tended each one until the world turned from brown to green. Sunlight streamed through the hole from Skyworld, allowing the seeds to flourish. Wild grasses, flowers, trees, and medicine spread everywhere. And now that the animals, too, had plenty to eat, many came to live with her on Turtle Island. Thank you.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. My name is Michael Retzel. I'm a member of this church and sit on its Financial Stewardship Committee. Our guest speaker today is an old friend of Rebecca and mine's. Although visiting us today from the far northeast, she spent several years in Arkansas and spent time at the Heifer Ranch, the Dripping Springs Gardens, and at the Dunbar Garden Project, during which time she lived in our house in Little Rock, where she kept a couple of pygmy goats and played violin. Raised Unitarian Universalist in New Jersey, Ariel Aaronson-Eves spent 4 glorious years farming in Arkansas before making her way to the Star King School for the Ministry in Berkeley, California, to pursue her Master's of Divinity. She graduated this past May and is currently finishing her preparations to be fellowshipped as a Unitarian Universalist minister, while studying herbalism and chaplaincy. For the past year, she has lived on the traditional lands of the Wabanaki Confederacy, also known as Maine and New Hampshire, where she is continuing to discern how best to integrate her passion for farming and her call to ministry. And now, without further ado, let us all welcome our guest speaker, Ariel Aaronson-Eves.
Way back in 2012, I spent 8 precious months living and learning and working at Dripping Springs Garden in Huntsville, Arkansas, an organic food and flower farm supplying the Fayetteville markets. Nestled along the dry Fork Creek with 4 acres of lush crops, a perfect little swimming hole, and plenty of Ozark hills and caves to explore, Dripping Springs is a place of profound beauty. When asked if he ever wanted to travel somewhere else, one of the farmers, Michael, would always respond, "Why? I live in paradise." A note of sarcasm barely discernible beneath the deep authenticity of his statement. He does, in fact, live in paradise. A beautiful timber frame house on a lush slope along a tranquil and refreshing creek, surrounded by caring and supportive community. He does meaningful work and eats the absolute best food in the world. But life at Dripping Springs is far from perfect. There is always more work to be done. There are pests in the garden and broken tools, dying dogs, and pesky interns who predictably bring their own interpersonal dramas. My own experience of paradise was tarnished by a difficult coworker and the sometimes pervasive ticks. There were days when all we could do was try to avoid the most infested areas and then give each other tick checks as we bathed in the creek. Watching out for water moccasins while we were at it, of course. It's easy to discount talk of paradise as impractical, utopian idealism. But to do so, in the words of feminist ethicist Sharon Welch, is the luxury of cynicism about extensive change, common to those who are already the beneficiaries of partial change. A trait of middle-class cultured despair. When we realize things will never be perfect, we give up in despair of all the ways we will likely not succeed. We become overwhelmed by all the ways we unintentionally perpetuate harm. Paradise certainly seems unrealistic and unattainable, at least if humans are involved. But what if we throw aside the idea of paradise as perfect or as an eschatological concept, which is to say, related to the end of the world, the completion of things through either a return to a state of pure innocence, as in the Garden of Eden, or a manifestation of a new state of pure judgment and justice? What if paradise instead is created by a way of living in a painful, complex, often violent world that resists this violence through an affirmation of life and joy? There is still harm outside of and within our communities. but it is addressed whenever possible in transformative ways that strengthen relationships and resilience. There is plenty of precedent for such an approach. One example is explored by liberal theologians Rebecca Parker and Rita Nakashima Brock in their powerful history, Saving Paradise: How Christianity Traded Love of This World for Crucifixion and Empire. Their scholarship is based on their observation that in early Christian art, the focus was not on suffering, but on life. They recognized the early church as communities of practice based on being at home and in love with the world. Far from being an afterlife of eternal salvation, paradise, they write, was the space of resistance to the death-dealing powers of Rome. Resistance to, which means in the context of. Brock and Parker go on to note, church teachers asserted that even in a conflict-ridden, difficult world, paradise existed on earth. They suggested that its most concrete, realized form was levied out in the social practices and spiritual training of the church. Life, they write, is found in surviving the worst a community can imagine, in lamenting the consequences of imperialism, and in holding fast to the core of goodness in the world, blessed by divine justice and abundant life. What might that mean for us now, as Unitarian Universalists in 2020? We're not about to return to the practices and theology of early Christianity, though it is fair to remind ourselves that our Unitarian theological roots go that deep before the Trinity was declared the only acceptable creed. But rather, we can reflect on how the communities and institutions we are a part of, whether this one or others, might help us experience paradise. Brock and Parker write, the early church taught that paradise was a place, a way of life, even an ecosystem. The church was a concentration of paradise, a place where strengths, weakness, needs, and contributions of each member could complement the others. Their life in paradise was a shared accomplishment in which the exercise of human powers and the imperatives of human need worked together to save and sustain life for all members together. While I was reading Saving Paradise earlier this summer, I took part in a series of online webinars offered by Movement Generation, an organization of diverse activists and thinkers dedicated to liberatory and transformative action towards a just transition. Quote, away from profit and pollution and towards healthy, resilient, and life-affirming local economies, end quote. The program was called Course Correction, Just Transition in the Age of COVID-19. And as I participated, I was struck by how much their vision of a just transition echoed Brock and Parker's vision of paradise. As I best understand it, a just transition, to be truly just, must be grounded in the needs and the will of those most harmed by our current operating system. But it also must involve all of us to succeed. Those of us who have certain privileges in the current paradigm, but understand the importance of change, have a vital role in onboarding others who share those privileges. This is not an easy transition. Sharon Welch writes, the transition from middle-class culture despair and cynicism to joyful resistance requires painful memories, painful lessons in memory and accountability. Paradise might be here, in this world, with everything we already have, but it is far from an Epicurean frivolity. It requires hard work and the willingness to be challenged and to be changed. Continually, not just until we reach a certain destination. The final webinar in the series offered visions of the future, 2050 to be specific. I could challenge this utopian project of putting paradise as at a distinct point in the future, but the presentations offered were much more realistic than that. They were built on the assumption that while some of today's problems were addressed in progressive ways, it takes time to repair from centuries, millennia of destruction and exploitation. We could, in theory, go carbon neutral today, and we would still experience the consequences of yesterday's ecological degradation 30 years from now. What the Movement Generation panelists offered were visions of enjoying life and making the most of it, despite continued heartache and pain, celebrating the progress made. This hypothetical change was possible because of changes in governance that put land and capital under community control, offering an economy that encouraged people to understand their local systems and put human need over human greed. One of the building blocks for this vision of 2050 was the idea of permanently organized communities. I struggled at first to understand this concept because I thought the only thing that's truly permanent is change. But then I realized that permanent doesn't mean forever in this case. It means organized for the long haul, not just in response to particular crises. And I quickly realized that this notion of permanently organized communities is best embodied in my understanding in our congregations as place-based, self-governing care and empowerment organizations. I wonder often how we might live into this potential, how our congregations might better support us in connecting with our ecosystems, offering what Parker and Brock refer to as rituals that train perception, so that we might see and feel the sacredness all around us. How might our congregations help us to organize and advocate for localized solutions that make sense in the landscape of our bioregions? We may be gathered in this moment in virtual space, but we are all each in a physical location. How do we relate to and know these places? The lands wait for those who can discern their rhythms, wrote Standing Rock Sioux theologian Vine Deloria Jr. in his classic text, God is Red. How do we begin to do that? To learn to work and co-create with our ecosystems, rather than attempting futilely to control them. It is our impossible attempts at exercising control over our landscapes, along with gross negligence at times, that yield our harmful impact on the planet. What if instead of seeing ourselves as controllers, dominators, we saw ourselves as participants and partners in the ecosystem? I've been thinking a lot about California lately as fires rip through the West. I've heard that the area now known as the San Francisco Bay may have been host to the largest concentration of indigenous people on this continent prior to European contact. I believe it. I lived in the area for 2 years of grad school, and it felt like a landscape that invited human settlement. Perfect weather every day, plentiful access to fresh and salt water, beautiful views, and every sort of person. But amidst the photos of California's orange sunless skies a few weeks back, as the region reveals itself to be less and less hospitable to human settlement, I've started to question that conclusion. My assumption had been that geography determines population, the way cities are built along rivers. But I'm reminded that the way humans participate in, some might say manage, a landscape has a huge impact on the carrying capacity of a place. A better forest management system, one that used fire as a tool and a friend, would decrease the destructiveness of wildfires and increase the water and carbon holding capacity of the soil, lessening the impact of fires, climate change, and the mudslides that often come in the seasons after fire. We do this in a garden when we build up beds and amend the soil in various ways. Take a plot of sunny land and make it more conducive to vegetable growth, and as much as possible to make a place conducive to human growth, in a way that honors mutual thriving. Our more modern practices have presented themselves as encouraging human growth, and yet not in cooperation with the natural systems, attempting instead to hold them back, control them, keep them separate when they are not separate. And I connect this with the idea of paradise, and particularly the image of the Garden of Eden as it is presented in Scripture, or maybe just in the popular imagination. That God created this perfect place and put humans in it, and then humans sinned and thus are kicked out and have had to work hard. Paradise, in this sense, precedes humanity. But what if paradise is in fact something we create? It is not a precondition, a state of innocence, but a creation and a process of partnership and cooperation. It is not free from death, from threats, from tragedy. Yet the extent of tragedy might be lessened, the responsibility communally held, the relationships of nurturance and healing abundant. Some indigenous origin stories point to this possibility, the human calling to work cooperatively with the earth, not to control it or subdue it or have dominion over it, but to share the gifts that make it green. Earlier we heard the Haudenosaunee story of Sky Woman, who fell from the sky world with a handful of seeds, whose survival was dependent on the care of animals, and who gave back in ways that supported her and them. I see in such a story an invitation to see ourselves as humans, as participants in the complex and delicate ecosystems of the earth. To be sure, it is still possible for us to act callously, with disregard and cruelty, seizing a need for control. But it is also by our hands and our gifts that the world turned from brown to green. I think now of paradise as something that only exists if we make it. It arises, say Parker and Brock, from being present, fully feeling, and passionately engaged in the struggle for life. It is attained by responding with gratitude for what is actually present. A bit of dirt on the back of a turtle and a handful of seeds. Or a lot of hard work and trial and error on a rocky hillside along a cool Ozark stream. And working with the wider ecological and geological community to create a home. Our job, then, as humans longing for lives of wholeness and of justice, is to pay attention, to try to notice the rhythms in the land and in ourselves, and to act in alignment. In the words of Brock and Parker, we can come to know the world as paradise when our hearts and souls are reborn through the arduous and tender task of living rightly with one another and the earth. May we all learn to be a part of such a paradise.
Thank you to everyone who participated in our service today, to Sarah, to John Perez, to Ariel for being our guest speaker today, and to our musicians, of course, who make these services so much richer. Next Sunday, Jan will be preaching again, and we invite you to join us. We also want you to keep in mind the ways to connect with us throughout the week. Be in touch with our office or visit our website to get more information about how you can stay connected with us. We close today, as we do every Sunday, with our words of blessing. I invite these words to be spoken aloud wherever you are. Go out into the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Honor all beings. Thank you to everyone who participated in our service today, to Sarah, to John Perez, to Ariel for being our guest speaker today, and to our musicians, of course, who make these services so much richer. Next Sunday, Jan will be preaching again, and we invite you to join us. We also want you to keep in mind the ways to connect with us throughout the week. Be in touch with our office or visit our website to get more information about how you can stay connected with us. We close today, as we do every Sunday, with our words of blessing. I invite these words to be spoken aloud wherever you are. Go out into the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Honor all beings. Take care. Be safe. We love you. We'll see you next week.